Hey, one summer when I was in junior high school, I went and I spent some time with a cousin of mine who lived outside the state that I lived in. And he worked at a farm right next to where he lived. It was a dairy farm. And so I went to spend some time with him, and because I wasn't going to be there very long and we wanted to hang out together, he invited me to go to work with him on this dairy farm. I grew up in the city, and so I wasn't used to any of that. I thought it'd be kind of cool, and so I said, yeah, I'll go with you. And so the next morning we got up super early before the sun came up and went outside his house, walked across his property to this farm next door. We walked inside the barn, and the first thing that hit me was the smell. It was overwhelmingly bad. And I remember just standing there going, oh man, this really stinks. And then I noticed there was about 50 cows in this barn, and there was about half of them on one side and half on the other, and they were in these little stalls where their heads were locked in so they couldn't get away during the milking process. And then there was this runway down the middle. And as we stood there looking down this runway, noticed immediately that these cows had no manners at all. They were just eliminating right there at will, seemingly unconcerned about anybody who was around or who it might affect. And as I said, it smelled really bad. Well, it was a morning full of poop and pee. I mean, that's all there is to it. But I did a great job of staying out of the splash zone. And we were there for several hours. And something took place during that several hour period. I'm not really sure quite when. It just kind of happened. But somewhere during that time that I was in that stinky barn, the stink didn't seem so bad anymore. I mean, it certainly wasn't as bad as when I first walked in. It was still there. It hadn't gone away. The cows were still there. They were still doing their deal. I mean, everything was still the same, but it didn't quite smell as bad as it had when I first walked into the barn. Well, like I said, we were there for several hours. We left to go back over to my cousin's house to eat breakfast. And as we got to the door, my auntie met us at the door, and she immediately gave us instructions to go downstairs, bathe, and put fresh clothes on, because she said we smelled like the barn. Well, I didn't smell like I smelled like the barn. You didn't, but I followed her instructions anyway. Came back up a while later, ate breakfast, and later on that day, she told us to go get our clothes so that she could put them in the wash and wash them. And I remember picking those clothes up off the ground and going, oh man, these clothes stink. They smelled like the barn. My auntie was right. They really did smell like the barn. Something happened when we were in that barn. I didn't get any cow stuff all over me. It was just somehow being in that atmosphere, the aroma in there, the fragrance attached itself to our clothing, and we began to smell like the barn. Really bad. You could say that it kind of overwhelmed our person. The culture of that barn contaminated our aromatic character. Because we spent time in there, it changed us. We didn't necessarily notice it ourselves, but it did. As you step into the Old Testament book of Judges, the people of Israel were living in the promised land, but they hadn't yet fully occupied it. That's what we've been talking about. And before they moved into the promised land, they were encouraged by their leader at the time, Joshua, to not worship the gods of the land. to not associate with the people of the land. In fact, they were told that they were supposed to kick the people of the land out. And they needed to be very careful to follow everything that God had said. See, because here was the problem. The spiritual atmosphere of the land was foul with the smell of cultural contamination. And God didn't want them to get that smell on them. If the people of Israel weren't careful, they were going to become contaminated too, and they probably wouldn't even realize what was happening. So, the people of Israel went into the land. They began to start to take little parts of the land. And at first they did a great job following God's command not to associate with the people. They were kicking the people out. They weren't worshiping the false gods. But as we've already seen, that didn't last very long. And eventually they started to compromise. They started to not just allow the people to stay in the land. They began, we saw, to intermarry with the people in the land, and then they went a step further and they began to embrace the religions of the people in the land. And so the very thing that God had warned the people about began to happen. They began to take on the aroma of the people of the land. They began to get contaminated by the very thing that God warned them against. And what we've seen is, as we've worked our way through this book so far, is that they hit these cycles. And I put it back up on the screen this morning, if you guys would go to that next slide, just to kind of remind us. And here's the cycle. They would rebel or be unfaithful. Then God would step in with a remedy, discipline. Then Israel would get remorseful. Then God would have mercy. And he'd step in and rescue with a rescuer, a judge, and then they would have rest again for a while. The problem is, every time they go through one of these cycles, it takes them a little bit further down. That's the spiral in the middle. They're going on a downward spiral. So every time they go around, they recover, but not quite to the place they were before. Every time they go around the cycle, they retain some of the contamination, some of the smell of the rotting culture around them. And when we got to chapter 10 last week, we saw once again Israel going through this cycle. And we see in verse 6, again, the Israelites did evil in the Lord's sight. They served the images of Baal and Ashtoreth and the gods of Aram, Sidon, Moab, Ammon, and Philistia. They abandoned the Lord and no longer served him at all. And what Nohea pointed out last week is that when we read all this, what we see is that this was kind of a total abandonment. They were worshiping any god they could get their hands on, basically, according to that passage. Totally abandoning God, totally doing anything that they wanted to do. The difference in the cycle, though, that we saw last week is we said when God brings in the remedy and they are disciplined, they normally come to a place of remorse. They normally go, God, please help us. But up to this point in Judges, we haven't seen them admit their sin, and we haven't seen them say, God, you do whatever you want to us. We're just asking you for help. But in chapter 10, Nohea took us through this last week, did a great job showing us how this was different. They repented, it appears, in chapter 10 for the first time because they acknowledged their sin, they submitted to God, and they took the action of getting rid of the idols and serving the Lord once more. And so this cycle was a little bit different. But we also came to our study last week kind of at a tension point where we didn't get to the rescue. We only got to the repentance part. In fact, Nohea kind of left the A-N-C-E off of deliverance God deliver, and then kind of stopped, because that's where we stopped last week. We didn't quite get there, but this week, that's what we're going to look at. We're going to look at the rescue part of this particular story and the rescuer that God used. And as we unfold this story, we're going to see 4 ways in which the culture contaminated the people of Israel. This should be a warning to us to be careful about being contaminated by the culture that we live in today. So, let's jump right into our story. It starts here in chapter 11, and it's a guy named Jephthah. And in verse 1 it says, "Now Jephthah of Gilead was a great warrior. He was the son of Gilead, but his mother was a prostitute. Gilead's wife also had several sons, and when these half-brothers grew up, they chased Jephthah off the land. 'You will not get any of our father's inheritance,' they said, 'for you are the son of a prostitute.' So Jephthah fled from his brothers and lived in the land of Tob. Soon he had a band of worthless rebels following him." Let's stop there for a minute so make sure that we get all of this. We've got this guy named Jephthah. His dad's name is Gilead. And Gilead goes out somewhere sometime. We don't know if it was before he was married, after he was married, but he engages with a prostitute. She gets pregnant. Jephthah is the result. Somewhere along the line, Gilead takes Jephthah in as a son. He grows up with his half-brothers. Probably Gilead's died at some point, and so the half-brothers say, "Hey, buddy, you're out of here. You're not getting any of this." And they literally kick him off of the land and out of the area. And he goes and lives in this area called Tob, which is right on the border with the enemy. And it's kind of no man's land if you study it a little bit. And he's living there by himself, an outcast and a reject. And who does he make friends with? Other outcasts and rejects. They're called here worthless rebels. It says that they were a band. Now, I don't want you to think about drums and trumpets and flutes and clarinets. It wasn't a band like that. Think of gang. This was a gang. And apparently what they did is that they would go out and they would raid the enemy and get things from them and hurt them. And apparently they were very successful because, notice, Jephthah is called a great warrior. Now I want to stop there for a minute because this is something new. Every other judge we looked at has not been a warrior. Maybe the first one, Othniel, maybe possibly because he was in the land and he had fought some battles, but he's never called a great warrior. We have guys like Shamgar. Remember Shamgar? He was a what? He was a farmer, remember? We have Ehud. Ehud is a left-handed guy. He wasn't supposed to be a warrior. He makes this sword, goes in, kills the fat king. You guys remember that whole deal. Gideon is certainly not a warrior. Remember, he's a fraidy cat. He was a coward. And so all the guys that we've looked at so far, they haven't even fallen in the list of warrior. But all of a sudden, we hit a guy who is a legitimate warrior. He raids the enemy, and he's successful at it because that's pretty much all he has to do. He's been kicked off his father's land. He has no inheritance. He can't grow vegetables and raise livestock, and so he's kind of a renegade. That's Jephthah. Well, let's look at verse 4. At about this time, the Ammonites began their war against Israel. When the Ammonites attacked, the elders of Gilead sent for Jephthah in the land of Tob. And the elders said, "Come and be our commander. Help us fight the Ammonites." But Jephthah said to them, "Aren't you the ones who hated me and drove me from my father's house? Why do you come to me now when you're in trouble?" So let's get the picture. Here, the enemy, the Ammonites. And the Ammonites, by the way, just kind of a little side note, because you see all these ites and you go, who are these guys? Let me tell you who the Ammonites are. If you're familiar with the Old Testament, God calls Abraham. You remember that whole deal in Genesis? And Abraham has a nephew, and his nephew's name is Lot. Remember that? And Lot and Abraham got real successful, and they got all kinds of livestock and servants. And it came to a point where it's like, hey, we can't live together anymore because we got too much stuff, we need to split up. And so Lot chooses to go towards Sodom and Gomorrah. You remember that whole deal? And then God eventually judges Sodom and Gomorrah, but he gets Lot and his 2 daughters and his wife out, but tells them don't look back. And when they're going out, the wife looks back and she turns into a pillar of salt. And so the only 3 that are left are Lot and his 2 daughters, and they go out and they live in the mountains. And the daughters are all worried because they had been married, but they had no children, so there was nobody to pass things on to. And so they get this crazy, wicked, evil idea. Let's get our father drunk and sleep with him. And so they do, and the older one goes first and the younger one goes second, and they both end up having children. Well, the younger one's children are the Ammonites, the descendants of that incestuous relationship. And here they are, hundreds of years later, causing problems for God's people. Don't think that your sin only affects the right now. It has ramifications that you and I probably will never live to see. And that's exactly what's going on here. So the Ammonites start making trouble for the Israelites, and these people from Gilead say, man, we need help. Who are we going to get? Well, by this time, Jephthah's reputation as this renegade, raiding warrior guy has gotten around, and they go, we need Jephthah back. We need to get him back. And so they send word and say, hey, please come be our commander. And he goes, whoa, wait a minute. Aren't you the same guys that hated me and kicked me out, and now you're calling me back? So what gives? Why do you want me? Catch this, verse 8. Because we need you, the elders replied. If you lead us in battle against the Ammonites, we'll make you ruler over the people of Gilead. Jephthah said to the elders, let me get this straight. If I come with you, and if the Lord gives me victory over the Ammonites, will you really make me the ruler over all the people? I was your reject, and now you're telling me you're going to make me the ruler? The Lord is our witness, the elders replied. We promise to do whatever you say. So Jephthah went with the elders of Gilead, and the people made him their ruler and commander of the army. At Mizpah, in the presence of the Lord, Jephthah repeated what had been said to the elders. So Jephthah goes from reject to ruler, from creep to commander, literally that fast. Why? Because they really needed somebody, and they didn't care about vetting him. They just needed somebody that had the credentials to do what they needed done to beat up on these Ammonites. So as we continue to go through the story, we're not going to read all of this next section, but let me tell you what's going on. Jephthah's first order of business is to send a message to the king of Ammon. And he basically is trying to negotiate with him. And he says to him, hey, what are you fighting us for? I mean, I don't even know what this is about. Remember, Jephthah hadn't been a part of this whole deal. He's living up in the mountains. He's doing his raiding thing. He doesn't know what's going on. They just get him to become commander. And so he's like, hey, maybe I should figure out why we're even having this fight. So he sends a message to the king of Ammon. He goes, look, I don't even know what's going on. Why are we fighting? And the king of Ammon writes back and he says, we're fighting because when your people came from Egypt out of slavery to this land, they stole our land and we want it back. Well, Ammon knew his history. Because, see, for the Israelites, it was written down in the first 5 books of the Bible, which they had at this point. Moses had written it down. And Jephthah knew his history. And so Jephthah writes back, and basically what we read in those next verses is he kind of gives the king of Ammon a history lesson. He goes, no, that's not really how it happened. Let me tell you how it happened. And he walks him through exactly what happened when Israel came out from Egypt and how they weren't allowed to pass these certain areas. And eventually they got to this point where they asked the king if they could pass. They weren't allowed to pass, and the king attacked them. And so they fought back, and they ended up beating them. And he says that God gave us the land. It's summed up in verse 26. It says, Israel had been living here for 300 years, inhabiting Heshbon and its surrounding settlements, all the way to Aroer and its settlements, and in all the towns among Aron River. Why have you made no effort to recover it before now? Look, we've been here for 300 years, and now you want to fight us, he's saying. Therefore, I haven't sinned against you. Rather, you've wronged me by attacking me. Let the Lord, who is the judge, decide today which of us is right, Israel or Ammon. He's got a great argument. He's got all the facts, he's got all the history, and he goes, look, you don't have your history right, king. This is the way it went down. And the bottom line is this: we haven't done anything wrong. It's you. You're the ones that are coming after us. Why don't we just leave this thing now and let it be done? Let God just judge the thing. Verse 28, but the king of Ammon paid no attention to Jephthah's message. He wanted the land. I don't care about the facts. I just want the land. Verse 29, at that time the Spirit of the Lord came upon Jephthah, and he went throughout the land of Gilead and Manasseh, including Mizpah in Gilead, and from there he led an army against the Ammonites. Now we have something really cool taking place here. The Spirit of the Lord comes upon him. Now, again, we got to understand what's going on here. Because I'm afraid that sometimes when we see a statement like that, we think that all of a sudden he's like in this trance. And he's just kind of doing stuff. And he doesn't even know what he's doing because God has invaded him. And he doesn't. And he'll wake up someday and go, what happened? Well, you just beat all these people. I did? But that's not the way it works. When the Spirit of the Lord comes on, and we read this in the Old Testament quite a few times, we've already read it in Judges, it's to empower a person to do a task they couldn't do on their own. It doesn't take away their faculty to make their own decisions. In fact, we're going to see in the next verse, he makes his own decision, which is a really stupid decision. And it has nothing to do with being led by the Spirit of God. When the Spirit of the Lord came upon a person, it was to empower them to do something they couldn't do on their own. But they still could do dumb things. Kind of like us today. We talk about being filled with the Spirit, and we hear that and we go, "Ooh, that sounds kind of spooky, filled with the Spirit. What does that mean?" It simply means, if you study it in the New Testament, the word filled can be replaced with the word controlled. To be filled by the Spirit is to be controlled by the Spirit. When a person is being controlled by the Spirit, they will do things that they couldn't normally do for long periods of time on their own, like be joyful, loving, kind, self-controlled. Yeah, but it still means you can make your own decisions. And it also means you could be filled right now, and 5 minutes from now, you're not being controlled by the Spirit. So when you see this, don't let it put false ideas in your mind. God was empowering Jephthah to do an amazing thing, but Jephthah still had to make some choices and decisions on his own. And we read in verse 30, and Jephthah made a vow to the Lord. He said, if you give me victory over the Ammonites, I will give to the Lord whatever comes out of my house to meet me when I return in triumph. I will sacrifice it as a burnt offering. Now we're going to see in just a minute this comes back to haunt this guy. Maybe you've read ahead and you already know what happened. But for whatever reason, we don't know why. God doesn't ask him to make this vow. He just makes the vow. He says, right on the verge of going to battle, God, I'm going to tell you right now, God, man, if you give me victory, when I go home, whatever comes out of my house, first thing out of my house, maybe he was thinking it was going to be Fido. I don't know. But if you read it in the Hebrew, it literally implies that it would be a person. So we don't know, maybe he thought it would be a servant, one of the worthless rebel gang members. I don't know. But he makes this crazy vow. And then he goes a step further. Not only am I going to give it to you, Lord, I'm going to give it to you as a burnt offering. I mean, it would have been kind of okay if he had just stopped, but he kept going. Verse 32, so Jephthah led his army against the Ammonites, and the Lord gave him victory. He crushed the Ammonites, devastating about 20 towns, from Ar to the area near Minnith, and as far away as Abel-Kiriam. In this way, Israel defeated the Ammonites. So Jephthah and his army, they go in, they defeat Ammon, and the Lord gives them victory, and it's a great thing. But I want you to notice something. That's it. That's all we have on this. We don't get a lot of detail about the battle. We don't get a lot of detail about the war. And it's because the author doesn't want to spend time there, because that's not where he's going to park. He's going to park on this vow. Because the tragic thing in this whole story is that this guy that God uses in an amazing way, who has faith in the moment, drops the ball. See, folks, we can have faith in the moment and do some really cool things when we allow God to control us and to be our master and lead us. But as soon as we take the wheel, watch out. And that's what happens to Jephthah. Verse 34, when Jephthah returned home to Mizpah, his daughter came out to meet him. She has no clue. She's playing on a tambourine and dancing for joy. She was his one and only child. He had no other sons or daughters. And when he saw her, he tore his clothes in anguish. "Oh, my daughter, you have completely destroyed me. You've brought disaster on me, for I have made a vow to the Lord, and I cannot take it back." So here comes Jephthah. He's out this great victory. He's followed God into battle. He's believed that he could win, and God gives him the victory, but he's made this stupid vow. And he walks home, and there's singing and there's dancing, and all of a sudden, all the joy, all the victory, all the great stuff that was going on is done in a second when his daughter walks out the front door. Can you imagine how this guy must have felt? I mean, he didn't have any other kids. We've read about other judges 2 weeks ago. This guy had 30 sons riding 30 camels, and this guy had 40 grandsons. This guy has one daughter. That's it. And she doesn't have a clue. She comes out. She's all excited. She's heard about the victory. This is Dad. He's done a great job. But I want you to notice the crazy way that he even responds. Look what he says. "You have completely destroyed me. You've brought disaster on me." What? No, stupid. You did it. Not her. We're going to get back to that. I just had to bring that out. Verse 36. Look at her response. This is what amazes me. And she said, "Father, if you've made a vow to the Lord, you must do to me what you have vowed. For the Lord has given you a great victory over your enemies. But first, let me do this one thing. Let me go up and roam in the hills and weep with my friends for 2 months, because I will die a virgin." "You may go," Jephthah said. And he sent her away for 2 months. She and her friends went into the hills and wept because she would never have children. When she returned home, her father kept the vow he had made, and she died a virgin. So it has become a custom in Israel for the young Israelite women to go away for 4 days each year to lament the fate of Jephthah's daughter. And this is one of the saddest passages, I think, in all of the Old Testament. It's also one of the craziest. But before we pull this apart a little bit more, I want you to remember some things. When the Old Testament is writing about individuals and characters and people, it tells us about the situations and the people, and it doesn't necessarily endorse what they're doing. It's just saying, this is what happened. I mean, we see this over and over again. God was against polygamy, but we read about the different characters in Scripture, like David and Solomon and even Abraham, who had multiple wives, and it's never saying that it's a good thing. It's just stating fact. Judges is a book of history. It is giving us the history between the time that Israel got into the promised land and the time that they get their first king. And it's telling us what took place in this 350 to 375 year period of time. They were ruled by these judges. And remember, the word in Hebrew means rescuers or saviors. And it's to foreshadow the need that the people ultimately would need the Savior. But it's giving us history, the good and the bad on these people. There's no endorsement here. Well, just when you thought it was bad, it gets worse. Chapter 12. Then the people of Ephraim mobilized an army and crossed over the Jordan to the Zaphon. They sent this message to Jephthah. Why didn't you call for us to help you fight against the Ammonites? We're going to burn down your house with you in it. Now, let's stop there for a minute because I need to remind you of something. Ephraim, they're just another tribe in Israel. So these are fellow Israelites. And they come to Jephthah after this whole deal and after his daughter's dead and everything. They say, look, we're mad at you because you never called us to help you in the fight. This happened before, do you remember? With Gideon. Gideon goes out and has that great success with just 300 guys. Remember that whole deal with the pots and the torches and the trumpets? And he gets back from this great battle, and who shows up? The people from Ephraim, and they're all mad with Gideon. You never called us to be a part of this thing. Well, Gideon just does the polite thing, kind of backs down, says, look, you guys are greater than I am, and he kind of just smooths the whole thing over, and it's cool. Well, you got a different character in Jephthah. Ephraim shows up, says the same thing. Hey, look, what is going on? You never called us. We wanted to be a part. You go, why do these guys want to be a part of the battle so bad? Because in those days when you went to battle, if you were a part of the battle, you got to keep the stuff of the battle. And if you weren't a part of the battle, you didn't get any of the stuff. And so they're upset because they didn't get any stuff. And so they're all mad with Jephthah, and we're going to burn you and your house. And not necessarily in that order. Well, Jephthah goes, what do you guys, what is wrong with you? God's given me this victory. Well, then it gets worse, and we won't read it, but they insult him. They basically said, you guys are a bunch of renegades anyway. You're a bunch of worthless fellows anyway. And Jephthah's like, I'm done. I've had it. And so he gets his army together, and he goes, and he defeats Ephraim. He goes in there. His own people. These are fellow Israelites. And he goes, forget that. I don't care. And he beats up on them. Verse 5. Jephthah captured the shallow crossing of the Jordan River. And whenever a fugitive from Ephraim tried to go back across, the men of Gilead would challenge him. Are you a member of the tribe of Ephraim? They would ask. If the man said, no, I'm not, they would tell him to say, Shibboleth. If he was from Ephraim, he would say, Sibboleth. Because people from Ephraim can't pronounce the word correctly. It's kind of funny. It's kind of like, I grew up in the South, and in the South, people say oil. It's the same thing, they just say it different. And people in the North laugh at them, not oil, it's oil. I grew up in Miami, and the old timers, the old Southerners, pronounced Miami, Miami. And if you ever heard somebody say Miami, you know, oh, you are original, you're from the South. Well, that's kind of what was going on here. So they beat up on Ephraim, but Jephthah's not done. I'm going to teach these guys a real lesson. So they blocked the place where people could go back and forth over the river. And as they went across, people would go across doing their business, and the soldiers would stop and say, are you from Ephraim? No, I'm not. Okay, then say Shibboleth. Sibboleth. I mean, Sibboleth. And they'd kill him right there. What it says. Then they would take them and kill him at the shallow crossing of the Jordan. In all, 42,000 Ephraimites were killed at that time. Folks, these are their own people. These are fellow Israelites. More people are killed here than by any of the enemies up to this point that Israel had. By their own, this is a civil war going on. This is a disaster. Say, how could we go? How could we go from being rescued and kind of miss the rest and jump into it? This is just nuts. It just goes to show you how far Israel had taken on the culture around them. See, we have this story, and man, if it would only stop at this one place, if it had only stopped at the victory, and if we could get rid of the vow, this would have been such a great story. Why couldn't it just stop there? Because it's real. It's real life. And God's given us the whole ugly picture. He empowers this guy to defeat this enemy. And we see this great faith, but with this great faith, we also see great failure. And it's pretty easy, I think, to see the contaminating effects of the culture on Israel and on Jephthah. And as we close out this morning, I want to give you 4 things, and there's probably more, but 4 that just jumped out at me. The contaminating effects of the culture. And by the way, these apply to us today because we're living in a pretty stinky culture too. Here's number 1. The culture can contaminate the way we do family. All the way back at the beginning of Jephthah's story. He was the son of Gilead. His mother was a prostitute. So this didn't start with Jephthah. It starts with his dad. You remember the whole story with Gideon. Gideon has a concubine. He ends up having a son with this concubine. His name is Abimelech. You remember that whole story. It was a disaster. And here we go again. Here's this guy that decides that he's going to find a prostitute and do with her what only should be done in a married situation. And as a result, she gets pregnant. See, can I stop there for a minute? Because we see prostitute and it kind of like, oh, wow, that's bad. A prostitute gets paid to have sex outside of marriage. There's a lot of people doing it today for free. And so we get all upset with this whole idea of a prostitute. Oh, wow, that's terrible. Is it? Yeah, it is. But why is one worse than the other? Oh, because it's illegal. Oh, so that's how we're going to base what's right and wrong on what our government tells us is right and wrong? Oh, better not go there, or we're in big trouble, huh? Because we've got a whole new definition on marriage. So we're going to go with that? How about abortion? See, be careful. Be careful. We start putting things in category. Well, this is worse than that. Is it? She's having sex because she's getting paid. And there's a lot of people running around doing it for free. It's still sin. The Bible calls it fornication. Sex outside of a married relationship between a man and a woman is wrong. It's sin. It's a sin certainly that God can forgive, but it's wrong. It's not God's best. See, God made us. He made relationships because God's all about relationship. I want you to stop and think about this. Why is the Trinity such a big deal? Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Why is that such a big deal? Why is that something we fight for? Because do you realize God exists in relationship? Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Relationship is something in the very fiber and character of the person of God. He knows relationship. He knows how relationship works best. And He says in His Word, one man, one woman, committed for a lifetime before me. Anything that is not God's plan is not God's best. That's what's going on here. Gilead decides, for whatever reason, he needs to find his sexual gratification outside of his marriage. And so what's it cause? It causes a mess. It causes sibling rivalry and this whole deal where he gets kicked out. See, the culture began to permeate the Israelites. You say, well, how do you know that just from that? Because prostitution was okay in that culture. It was a part of their worship, if you can believe it. They had temple prostitutes. And part of a worship experience was with these temple prostitutes. So prostitution was no big deal. The culture was saying, it's no big deal, it's okay, it's no big deal. And so the Israelites were saying, it's no big deal. Concubine, a prostitute, hey man, boys will be boys, just do what you need to do. Are we kind of getting there today? How about shows like Modern Family? Man, you don't think that makes an effect on us? Modern Family started in 2009. That was before same-sex marriage was the law of the land. You don't think shows like that and Will and Grace and Ellen DeGeneres coming out, you don't think that none of that has had an effect on our culture? You don't think? Then you're dreaming. It has. And it's had an effect on Christian folk too, because we're much less apt. Sin is such a harsh word. No, it's a God word. And just like heterosexual sex outside of marriage is a sin, God says homosexual sex is a sin. Whatever the culture says, it doesn't matter. See, if we're not careful, we begin to take on the smell of our culture because we don't want to offend, we don't want to hurt people. Listen, that's not loving. No, it is loving. Let me tell you how. See, if you're having sex outside of marriage, and I tell you it's sin, it's because God has something better for you. Right? I mean, if God, we've talked about this since we started the service this morning. And by the way, something interesting, little side note. Never collaborated with the worship team on what scripture I was going to use to open service this morning. Did I, Vi? We never talked. Huh? Is God trying to tell us something this morning? He's a good God. And He doesn't have just good for you. He has best for you. And when you step out of His best, to not tell you that you've stepped out of His best and He has something better, that's unloving. That's unloving. If I know something best and I don't tell you because I'm afraid you might get upset or, I don't want to hurt your feeling, then I'm being unloving by not telling you. You see, we even allow the culture to define how we express love. And this is what's happening with Israel. The smell of the culture is contaminating Jephthah's father, and the results are he's doing family all wrong. And we could just go on and on here, folks, but we're not. Number 2, the culture can contaminate not just the way we do family, but the way we choose leaders. So they kick Jephthah out. You son of a prostitute. You're not staying here. You're not having our land. And apparently the elders of the city and the town are like, yeah, get him out of here. We don't want this guy around. Well, all of a sudden, the Ammon starts flexing their muscles and starts being like, okay, we're taking over the land. Who are we going to get? Well, Jephthah, he's a pretty good warrior. Maybe we should try to go and get him. And so they send word. Man, Jephthah, would you come and be our commander? I want you to notice what's not in the passage. These elders, they never pray. They never seek God. They never go after a prophet and, hey, we're in this situation. What do you think God wants us to do? There's none of that. The problem arises. They think of the reject. Get him. What's going on? Well, it's what I need. It's what's good for me. Look, okay, yeah, I didn't really like him before, but I really need him now. And you see the whole twisted way in which they're approaching choosing leaders. We want you because there's something in it for us approach. But folks, isn't that the way we do it? We just came through a presidential election, probably the craziest, nuttiest, right? And by the way, can I remind you of something? that I said that some of you, I think, have forgotten. I was saying for a number of times, no matter who gets in office, we're in trouble. Does anybody remember that? Yeah. We're in trouble. But it doesn't matter who got in there. We still would be in trouble. It's just a different kind of trouble, different vantage point of trouble, different hairstyle of trouble, however you want to look at it. But here's the bottom line. What do most people ask? For instance, presidential situation. What are they going to give us? What promises are you making? I like to know what I'm going to get before I give you my vote. Right? Seek God. Look for a man or a woman who fears God. Look for a person who makes decisions morally and not just seeing which way the wind's blowing. See, these guys, they weren't concerned about character, because if they were, they wouldn't have went after Jephthah. In fact, you could make the argument that they wanted the bad boy character, and that's why they went after him. Because we need a bad boy. And so they get this guy. Tattoos and all, leather jacket, who cares? Whatever. We want this guy. And listen, what happens is that cultural contamination begins to come into the church. And Weldon got up here and talked about how we're looking for an assistant pastor, and if we're not careful, we're going to start looking for some. Well, how many degrees does he have? Does he have kids? Are his kids the same age as my kids? Because I want them to have somebody to play with. I mean, whatever. I don't know. Is his wife pretty? Is he, howly? How do we choose leaders? Where are we taking our cues? And these guys obviously had been contaminated by the culture around them, and they were just looking for, whoever fits what we want right now. We'll even make you leader. Heck, if you just whip these guys, we'll make you leader. Here's number 3. The culture can contaminate the way we approach God. Oh, man. Jephthah makes this vow to the Lord. He says, if you give me victory over the Ammonites, I will give to the Lord whatever comes out of my house. Do you know what's happening here? Do you see what's happening here? Jephthah's bargaining with God. This is a bargain. God, you do this. If you'll do this for me, I'll do this for you. You go, yeah, that's terrible. Bargaining with God. That's awful. Have you ever done it? Never. I would never bargain with God. Oh, okay. So you're not the kind of person that says something like this. God, if you just get me through this, I'm going to go to church for the rest of the year. God, if you'll just come through on this one thing, I promise I'm going to start tithing every month, God. God, you know how big a deal this is. If you will do this for me, heck, I'll join the worship team. God, I'll go on the next mission trip, God. I'll volunteer to clean the toilets at church. Whatever. We've all done it. We've all been there, if we're honest. Bargaining with God. Would you put this down? You cannot bargain with a sovereign God. Do you understand that? How stupid that is? He's sovereign. He knows it all. He's in control of it all. And then we try to make a deal with him. Okay, God, I'm going to rub real hard. It's kind of what we're doing, isn't it? You can't do that with a sovereign God. God will not allow you to play that game. But that's what Jephthah's doing here. You say, well, it worked. No, it didn't. God was going to give him victory before he made the stupid vow. That's why it's so stupid. See, God, this was so unnecessary. God had already given them the formula. He'd given Israel the formula to be successful. Back in Joshua, you remember? Joshua was speaking to the people. They had gotten into the land. Joshua was about ready to die, and he wanted to remind them of what God had said. And he said that the Lord had driven out great and powerful nations before you. No one has yet been able to defeat you. Each one of you will put to flight 1,000 of the enemy. For the Lord your God fights for you, just as he promised. So, be very careful to love the Lord your God. There was the key. It's all about trust and obey. Trust me, obey. When I tell you you can beat these guys, you can. You don't have to make any dumb vows. Just go and fight the way that I've told you to. And that's what's happening here. See, Jephthah's problem is he knew some of the word. When he does this whole negotiation thing with the king, he knew the history that came out of the first 5 books, but it's like he didn't know the rest of it. Because we're told in Leviticus and in Deuteronomy, don't make vows. Then we're told in Leviticus 28 that if you do make a dumb vow, there's a way to get out of it. But he obviously doesn't know that. Because here's the deal. Jephthah, along with the rest of Israel, had spent so much time in the culture getting the stench that was of the culture that they didn't even know the character of God or the Word of God. And so Jephthah approaches God, the one true God, the way that you would approach the false gods, with a sacrifice, because that's what they were doing in the land. And that's what Jephthah had seen and what he had been taught. And so he's approaching Yahweh the way that you would approach Molech or Baal or any of the other gods that were in that society. And you don't approach the one and only God like you approach a false god. Because every time we begin to twist the way that we're supposed to approach and worship God, we end up with a mess. And if we listen to the culture is going to even dictate to us how to approach God. They're going to tell us what our God is like. If you don't believe me, you read an article about some of these topics that we just talked about living together or homosexual relationships, or, oh no, we're not supposed to say anything about that because God's a God of love. He's a God of love. He is a God of love. And a loving God has given a loving plan on how to love best. But the culture is going to even tell us how we should approach our God. And get this, they're even going to make laws that restrict us in the way that we approach our God. And if we're not careful, we'll be like Israel and Jephthah, and we'll just take on that smell. And then number 4, the culture can contaminate the way we deal with each other. This whole thing in chapter 12, those last few verses, what a tragedy. 42,000 Israelites die at the hands of their own people. Why? Because they didn't deal with it right. Jephthah's done with it. I'm done with you guys. Ephraim's mad because you didn't make us a part so we could get our stuff. And everybody's got this deal going on and everybody's mad. And so it just all comes to a head and they go to blows and 42,000 die. And folks, listen, what the world tells us is the way that we handle each other, the way that we handle people is, man, you got to put you first because nobody else is. They're going to walk all over you. So you better make sure that you get what you need and put yourself up front and be the man or the woman. That's what culture tells us. And guess what? We start taking that junk on. And we see that permeating in our church. Not necessarily in our church, but in our church in general, in the world. If you don't believe it, man, I can tell you some pretty ugly stories. Louise and I grew up in the church. We're PKs, pastors' kids. We've seen some stuff. People dealing with each other in just terrible ways. Paul said this in Galatians 5:14. For the whole law can be summed up in this one command: love your neighbor as yourself. But if you are always biting and devouring one another, watch out. Beware of destroying one another. See, biting and devouring each other, that can come face to face. We can say some pretty ugly things to each other, but you know where I found most of the ugly goes on? Behind the back. The gossip. The backbiting. Oh, we're all nicey-nicey in front. Oh, yeah. And that stuff destroys. And we start dealing the way the world deals. I don't have Facebook. I'm not going to say never because I don't know situations, but I have absolutely zero desire to have Facebook. Because people show me and I hear the stuff that's written on there. Absolutely ridiculous. Why you air stuff you wouldn't 10 years ago, you'd never say out loud. You might think it, but you wouldn't. But now we got the internet and we have anonymity, kind of. Your name is there and your picture's there, right? But we'll put all this junk. And frankly, who cares if you're standing in front of the bananas trying to figure out which one to pick? Who cares? Just pick a dumb banana and go home. Why are you I'm trying to figure out that anybody out there have ideas on what kind of banana? Click. I don't get it. Please don't misunderstand. I'm not saying Facebook's bad and you shouldn't. Just like all the other stuff, good tool. It's a great way to get word out. It's a great way to stay in touch with friends. I understand all of that. I have my reasons for not being on it. I was convicted years ago of a felony and I don't want it to be on. Just kidding. It's not wrong, but it can be really bad if you don't approach it as a Christian, as one who's been redeemed and knows that they need to be self-controlled in everything they do, including what they put on their Facebook page. So when I worked in this barn with my cousin, we got this barn smell all over us. Didn't realize it was happening, but it happened. It contaminated our clothes. My grandfather, my mom's dad, had been a dairy farmer for a while. And my mom told me, she goes, I never ever smelled that barn smell on my father. And I said, well, how is that possible? He spent all that time with cows in that barn, and he could walk out and not smell like the barn. And she said, he wore these coveralls. They went over, and there's a zipper in the front, and he'd wear those doing his barn work, and when he left the barn, he would take that off before he came in the house, and you never smelled barn on him because he was protected from the smell. Folks, we need some spiritual coveralls because we live in a pretty contaminated, messed up culture. And you say, well, what does that look like? What do those spiritual coveralls look like? Listen to 2 Peter 3, verse 17. You already know these things, dear friends. So be on guard. Then you'll not be carried away by the errors of these wicked people and lose your own secure footing. Rather, you must grow in the grace and the knowledge of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. How do I grow in the grace and knowledge of the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ so I don't follow these wicked things that are around me? I got to have this, man. See, this is what Jephthah should have been going back to. He would have known all these things, wouldn't have made that dumb vow. The people would have known how to choose a leader. Gilead would have known how to raise a family. Everything would have been the way that God wanted it to be instead of the mess that it turned out to be. But they didn't go to this. They didn't know God's word. Therefore, they didn't know God's character. Therefore, they began to smell like the culture around them. Folks, we got to. This is my coveralls. This is what I got to know this, how I know God, so I know what He wants in my family, my marriage, my job. And then I got to lean heavily on the Holy Spirit, who's the one that will empower me to do what I can't do on my own. Amen? Amen. Would you bow your heads, please, and close your eyes?